even if we get this government reactivated right now, it's going to be back to the same argument that we were at 11:55 Eastern Daylight Time Monday. Now, if their demands are not met, then domestic and international economic chaos ensues when the ceiling isn't raised and the United States cannot pay its bills. Now, I ask you, this is primarily for anti-Obama people that are opposed to the president at all costs. Is the hatred for one man and wrecking the country and potentially the world economy over this really worth it? Is it really worth all this headache that we're putting ourselves through? The government shutdown is hurting our economy even more and creating pain for families that weren't feeling the pinch before. Okay? Members of Congress shouldn't be getting paid while our government is closed. But nevertheless, they are, because they're on a separate system. How that worked, I don't know, but obviously their predecessors realized, hey, in the event of government shutdown, let's put our money over here. This is how we get our salary. All right? Well, a friend of mine is giving her pay, because she's a government employee, giving her pay to the shutdown, during the shutdown, to the Foundation for the National Institutes of Health. Okay? Life-saving NIH medical research is being slashed during the shutdown, including clinical trials for kids with cancer, and it's just one of the reasons the House needs to stop this irresponsible gamemanship and pass the Senate bill to get the government open so we can focus on the work of the American people. Giggling at the thought of hundreds of thousands of Tea Partiers trying to log into healthcare.gov privately and quietly in the darkness under their bed sheets with a flashlight, that just makes me chuckle even more. Now, servers were obviously smashed yesterday because there were breakdowns. Matter of fact, Fox News was gloating about that on their newscast yesterday. But they'll sleep well when they figure out how much better coverage they could possibly get at a cheaper rate. That's what the Affordable Care Act is. But the next day they can publicly resume their fight against Obamacare, in particular President Obama, because that's what this is largely about. That's what I've seen. This is my opinion, okay? Just keep that in mind as we move forward. I'm the world's foremost authority on my own opinion. No one knows more about what I think or don't think than me. Well, and a live operator named Lindsay at the Affordable Care Act healthcare.gov website said millions of people signing up crashed the website yesterday, and they hope to be back up by mid to late morning yesterday. And the GOP said most of the country didn't want Obamacare. Well, obviously there's some people that are changing their minds, as I refuse to believe that many people were that curious about a government program that were opposed to it and then log on to the website to see what all the fuss is about. But then I could be wrong. Well, yesterday, Obamacare exchange websites experienced problems with the high volumes of traffic. But instead of focusing on the exchange's popularity, proven by millions of Americans accessing the new healthcare program, right-wing media largely chose to pretend the whole deal was an absolute failure. Now, there was a Republican on CNN last night saying that they have compromised by not asking for a complete repeal of Obamacare. This was Monday night. Just a delay. Think about how perverted this type of thinking really is, folks. It's delaying the inevitable. As I've stated, the Affordable Care Act is a law. Okay? It is a law. And it's been upheld by the United States Supreme Court. Now, granted, they called it a tax, but it is still a law. A tax is a law. There's very little difference there. It has been debated, voted on by the Senate and the House, signed into law by the President, and confirmed by the Supreme Court. Now, they say the compromise is not repealing a law that has already gone through the process of becoming a law. Now, to the Republicans' frame of mind these days, it seems that compromise means dismissing the entire law, making the process of government, or rather dismiss the entire lawmaking process of government to give them what they want. Jon Stewart said last night on the Republican complaint that Obama will negotiate with the Iranians but not with them. Well, if it turns out that President Barack Obama can make a deal with the most stringent, hardline, unreasonable, totalitarian mullahs in the world, but not the Republicans, maybe he's not the problem. And I agree with that statement and that assessment. Now, you're willing to take me to town on that task and on that opinion if you'd like, but it is something to think about. If he can negotiate some sort of a peace with hardliners like Iran, the Republicans need to get their act together. And this is part of the reason why I left the party. I was a staunch Republican basically from the end of Reagan's term up until 9 years ago. I left because I saw the shift in the Republican Party. I'd felt it for years, but I put it aside up until 2004 when they made the same-sex marriage issue a big issue, a far bigger issue than it needed to be, because they were arguing that it's about morality. No, banning same-sex marriage is oppression. It's discrimination. And it was time that it comes to a halt. And it's slowly coming there in this country. And I'm glad. But that's where I stand on that at this particular time. Now, continuing on with topics at hand here. A friend of mine posted this article this morning on Facebook about an hour or so ago. I haven't had a chance to fully read through it, so bear with me. But it is an interesting comparison. Then we'll get to the heart of the rest of today's program. The United States' self-imposed federal government shutdown has a way of making people around the world shake their heads in bewilderment. Not just here in the United States, but as Georgetown professor Eric Voten wrote for the Washington Post's New Monkey Cage political science blog recently, in it he said, quote, "I cannot think of a single foreign analogy to what is happening in the U.S. today," unquote. But there actually is one foreign precedent. Australia did this once in 1975. Yeah, 1975. The Australian government shut down because the legislature had failed to fund it, deadlocked by a budgetary squabble. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Well, it looked a lot like the U.S. shutdown of today, or the 17 previous U.S. shutdowns. 17 shutdowns. Australia's 1975 shutdown ended pretty differently, though, and than they do here in America. Queen Elizabeth II's official representative in Australia, Governor General Sir John Kerr, simply dismissed the Prime Minister. Said, "You're gone. You're out of here." He appointed a replacement who immediately passed the spending bill to fund the government. 3 hours later, Kerr dismissed the rest of Parliament. Then, Australia held elections to restart from scratch, and they haven't had another shutdown since. They've been running strong for 38 years. We've had 18 government shutdowns in that time. 18 government shutdowns in the time that Australia has got their act together. Now, here's how it happened. Australia, like the United States, has both a Senate and a House of Representatives. 38 years ago, the chambers were controlled by different parties. The House passed an appropriations bill to fund the government, but the Senate refused to pass it because they believed that the government was spending too much money on unworthy programs during an economic downturn. The opposition party that controlled the Senate said it would not pass the spending bill unless the government met its somewhat outlandish demand. Does this all sound so very familiar so far? I thought so. Well, in the Australian case, though the opposition's demand wasn't repeal of a healthcare law, they wanted early elections, which they believed would unseat the ruling party. Prime Minister Gal Whitlam rejected the opposition's demands but couldn't bring the parties to a compromise, and the federal budget went unfunded. Then on the morning of November 11th, 1975, Whitlam announced that he would hold early elections not for the House, but for half of the opposition-controlled Senate. Typically, one half of the Senate goes up for re-election at a time. Kerr, as the official representative of the Queen, who is technically still sovereign over Australia, summoned Whitlam to his office and fired him at 1:15 p.m. 15 minutes later, Kerr appointed the leader of the opposition Liberal Party, Malcolm Fraser, as Whitlam's replacement. By 2 o'clock, before most even realized what had happened, Fraser got his allies in the previously deadlocked Senate to push through the government spending bill. Then everything kind of fell into chaos. When the ruling Labour Party in the House learned about Whitlam's firing and Fraser's appointment, its members revolted with a no-confidence vote against Fraser. Fast forward to 4:50 that afternoon, Kerr dissolved the rest of Parliament, essentially firing everyone, with a formal proclamation that ended with the words, "God save the Queen." Just 1 month later, Australia held national elections to replace the now dissolved government. The opposition, led by Fraser, swept to victory in both houses. Australia has not had another shutdown since. Now, this sort of thing could never happen in the United States. Our government is structured differently. But the fact that Australia could pull it off is a quirk of its history as a former British colony that, unlike the United States, never fully broke away. Australia's governor does not typically fire prime ministers or do much of anything. It's largely a ceremonial position and a legacy, as the colonial titles suggest, of a time when Australia was a far-flung possession of the British Empire. It's now an independent country, but still a member of the Commonwealth of Nations, which means it recognizes the British monarchy as technically in charge. That monarch still has formal power over Australia's government, but almost never actually uses it. 1975 crisis was the exception. The governor technically acts solely on behalf of the monarch. The office was established before telephones existed, after all. This means that, legally speaking, the 1975 Australian government funding crisis ended because Queen Elizabeth II dismissed everyone in the government. In practice, the governor did in the actual firing. Now, you might find yourself wishing that the United States could follow Australia's example, fire everyone in Congress, hold snap elections next month, and restart from scratch. But we can't, because we haven't recognized the British monarchy or had a London appointed governor general in more than 2 centuries. Maybe Britain will take us back, like another friend of mine last night suggested on Facebook. And then I said, do you really think they'd want to inherit our mess? And he just laughed and said, no, I don't think they would. And I agree with you, Billy. Billy agreed with me. I said, I don't think it would work either. So, interesting thing to think about, though, on this Wednesday. Well, let's see here. I have rambled on for almost 45 minutes, and I thought about bringing this up, but it's not really pertinent to the topic at hand and just create more problems. So I'm going to put it aside for future use, and hopefully I won't forget it. Just a note to myself. Anyway, I'm going to take a break and come back in a few minutes with things like news headlines, as well as news of the weird a little bit later on, celebrity birthdays, today in history, plus a whole lot more on this edition of First Cup. So I hope you'll stick around in another special live edition of said program. And yes, I am stalling for time. I'm trying to remember where I put some of my cards, so bear with me. I'm going to put that over there, and then we're going to delete this one, and then we're going to click on Add, and I want to search for a bumper that I need real quick, and then we'll be on our way. Okay? Sounds like a winner, doesn't it? Alright, I thought you would agree. So we'll be right back after these quick messages, so stick around. You're listening to First Cup, and I'm your hunky-dunky host, I don't know what that means either, Joe Haffner, on this Wednesday.
How you doing? My name's Steve. My family's lived in this neighborhood for years. Recently, things got so tight, we had to go to our local food bank for help. I lost a lot of sleep worrying about what the neighbors might think. That is until I saw them.